Welcome to Whispered Tales. Today's story is called Don't Waste Your Life. Learn English through Life Lessons. This is not just about learning a language. It's about time, choices, regret, growth, and the courage to begin again. Daniel Harper was 32 years old when he realized something terrifying. Life was moving forward, and he was standing completely still. Every morning, Daniel woke up at 6:30 a.m. to the sharp sound of his alarm. He lived in a small apartment on the edge of Cleveland, Ohio. Nothing was wrong with the apartment. Nothing was great either. It was quiet, plain, and forgettable, just like the days he was living. He worked at a local warehouse, scanning boxes, labeling shipments, doing the same tasks again and again. The job paid the bills, but it never touched his soul. Daniel often told himself, it's just temporary. But years passed, and temporary became permanent. On his lunch breaks, Daniel watched people around him. Some laughed confidently. Some talked on their phones. Some discussed promotions, travel plans, future goals. Daniel mostly stayed quiet. When conversations turned professional, he felt a familiar tightening in his chest. His English was okay. Not bad, not fluent. Enough to survive, never enough to shine. He remembered clearly how this all started. Years ago, Daniel had dreams. He wanted to work in customer relations, maybe corporate training, maybe even teaching one day. He loved ideas, communication, and connecting with people. But every time an opportunity came, there was always the same excuse. I'll improve my English later. I'm too busy right now. I'm not confident enough yet. Later never came. One evening, after another exhausting shift, Daniel stopped at a small diner near his apartment. He ordered coffee and sat by the window. Outside, rain tapped softly against the glass, blurring the city lights. That's when he noticed an older man sitting alone across the diner. The man looked calm, peaceful. He read a book slowly, carefully, like time was no longer chasing him. When the waitress spoke to him, his English was clear, confident, gentle. Not loud, not forced. Something about him stayed with Daniel. A few minutes later, as Daniel got up to leave, he accidentally dropped his wallet. The older man picked it up and handed it back with a warm smile. "You dropped this," he said. Daniel thanked him, slightly embarrassed. The man nodded and said, "You know, life drops hints too. Most people don't pick them up." Daniel laughed politely, but the words followed him all the way home. That night, lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, Daniel felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Fear. Not fear of failure, but fear of wasting his life. He thought about how many hours he had spent scrolling on his phone, how many chances he had avoided because of insecurity, how many times he chose comfort over growth. And deep down, he knew the truth. It wasn't just English he was avoiding, it was change. That night, Daniel made a quiet promise to himself, not a loud one, not one he told anyone about, just a simple thought. I don't want to wake up at 40 and regret today. But promises are easy. Action is not. And Daniel was about to learn that the hardest lessons don't come from books, they come from life itself. The next morning didn't feel magical. There was no sudden motivation, no dramatic change, no powerful background music playing in Daniel's mind. His alarm rang at 6:30 a.m. just like always, and for a moment he almost turned it off and went back to sleep. But something small had shifted. As he sat on the edge of his bed, tying his shoes, the words from the diner echoed again in his head. Life drops hints, too. On his way to work, Daniel usually listened to random music or scrolled through social media. That morning, instead, he opened a simple English podcast on his phone. Nothing advanced, just everyday conversations. At first, it felt uncomfortable. Some words slipped past him. Some sentences sounded too fast. He caught himself wanting to quit after 5 minutes. "This is pointless," he muttered. But then he remembered how many times he had quit before and where that had brought him. So he kept listening. At work, during lunch, he usually sat in silence. This time, when a coworker named Mark asked a casual question, Daniel forced himself to answer in full sentences instead of short replies. It wasn't perfect. He stumbled. He repeated himself. He felt awkward. But something surprising happened. Mark listened. Not judging, not laughing, just listening. "You're getting better, man," Mark said casually, grabbing his drink and walking away. The words stayed with Daniel all day. That evening, Daniel stopped by the local library. He hadn't been there in years. The smell of old books and quiet spaces felt strangely comforting. He found a shelf labeled Communication and Language. He picked up one book, then another. He didn't borrow 10. He didn't make unrealistic plans. Just one book. At home, instead of watching TV, he read for 20 minutes, slowly, carefully. He read aloud sometimes, hearing his own voice fill the room. It felt strange, but alive. Days passed. Not dramatic days, ordinary days. Some days he was tired. Some days he skipped practice. Some days he doubted himself again. But something had changed. He was no longer waiting for motivation. He was building discipline. One Friday evening, Daniel ran into the older man again, the one from the diner. This time, it wasn't rain. The sky was clear, and the diner was almost empty. The man recognized him instantly. "You look different," he said. "I think I feel different." They talked for a while. The man's name was Richard Coleman, a retired public speaker who had spent decades traveling, teaching, and training people. Daniel hesitated, then asked, "Can I ask you something?" Richard nodded. "Do you ever feel like you wasted time?" Richard leaned back, silent for a moment. "Every day," he said honestly, "but I stopped letting that regret control my future." He looked directly at Daniel. "You don't need perfect English to start living. You need courage. Fluency comes after." Those words hit Daniel harder than any grammar rule ever had. That night, Daniel wrote a sentence on a piece of paper and taped it above his desk. "Start now, improve later." He didn't know it yet, but this simple sentence was about to change everything. The following weeks passed quietly, but inside Daniel, a slow transformation was taking place. He no longer measured his days by how tired he felt, but by how much effort he had given. Every morning, even when motivation was missing, he listened to English conversations while getting ready. He didn't understand everything, and that was fine. He had finally accepted that confusion was not failure, it was part of learning. At work, Daniel began doing something that once terrified him. He started speaking. Not loudly, not perfectly, but honestly. When his supervisor asked for updates, Daniel forced himself to explain instead of nodding silently. Sometimes he paused to find the right word. Sometimes his sentences weren't smooth. But each time he spoke, a small layer of fear peeled away. One afternoon, a new employee joined the warehouse. Her name was Emily Parker, fresh out of college, confident and curious. During lunch, she sat across from Daniel and asked where he was from, what he liked to do, what his goals were. Normally, Daniel would give short answers and end the conversation quickly. This time, he stayed. He told her about his interest in communication, about how he wanted to move into a role where he could talk to people instead of boxes. Saying it out loud felt strange, almost dangerous, as if speaking the dream might expose how fragile it was. But Emily didn't dismiss him. She smiled and said, "You'd be good at that. You explain things clearly." That sentence stayed with Daniel longer than she probably expected. For the first time, someone saw potential where he had only seen weakness. That night, Daniel stood in front of the mirror and spoke to himself in English. Not memorized sentences, not lessons, just his thoughts. He talked about his day, his fears, his hopes. He sounded awkward, but he also sounded real. For the first time, English felt less like a subject and more like a bridge between who he was and who he wanted to become. Yet progress brought discomfort. The more Daniel improved, the more he became aware of how much time he had wasted before. Regret crept in late at night, whispering cruel questions. Why didn't you start earlier? How many opportunities are already gone? He almost let those thoughts pull him backward, but then he remembered Richard's words. Regret could teach him, but it could not drive him. One evening, while scrolling through job listings, Daniel saw a position posted internally at his company, Customer Support Associate. The requirements included strong communication skills and confidence in English. His heart raced. Old Daniel would have closed the page instantly. This time, he didn't. He stared at the screen for a long time, then whispered, "I'm not ready, but I'm closer than before." For the first time in years, Daniel didn't feel trapped by his limitations. He felt challenged by them, and that made all the difference. Daniel didn't apply for the job immediately. Instead, he gave himself a promise, not a deadline, but a standard. He decided that before clicking the apply button, he would become someone who believed he deserved the role, not someone hoping to get lucky. That mindset alone changed how he approached each day. He started using English in places where he once avoided it. At the grocery store, he made small talk with the cashier instead of looking at his phone. On the bus, he listened carefully to conversations around him, noticing expressions, tone, and rhythm. English was no longer something he studied only when it was convenient. It became part of his life. On weekends, Daniel met Richard at the diner. Their conversations grew longer and deeper. Richard didn't correct every mistake. He listened, then gently rephrased sentences, letting Daniel hear better ways to express the same idea. Language, Richard often said, is not about perfection, it's about connection. One Saturday afternoon, Richard shared a story from his past. He talked about a brilliant opportunity he once lost because he waited too long to believe in himself. "I thought I had time," Richard said quietly. "Time is the one thing that never waits." Those words hit Daniel hard. He realized that wasting life wasn't always about doing nothing. Sometimes it was about doing just enough to stay comfortable. That night, Daniel opened his laptop and updated his resume. He rewrote sentences carefully, choosing clear and simple words. He practiced explaining his experience out loud, imagining an interview room, imagining confidence. His voice still trembled, but it didn't disappear anymore. The next morning, Daniel applied for the position. The moment he clicked submit, fear rushed in. Doubt followed quickly. Who do you think you are? What if they laugh? What if you fail? But underneath the fear, something else lived now. Pride. He had tried, and trying was no longer terrifying.
Days later, an email arrived. Interview invitation. Daniel stared at the screen for a full minute, his hands shaking slightly. This wasn't success yet, but it was proof that his effort mattered. That evening he stood in front of the mirror again. This time, he didn't just speak English, he believed it. The day of the interview arrived faster than Daniel expected. He woke up before his alarm, his mind already racing through possible questions and answers. As he got dressed, he reminded himself of something important. This interview was not a test of perfection. It was a conversation, a chance to be understood. On the bus ride to the office building, Daniel listened to nothing. No podcast, no music, just silence. He practiced breathing slowly, repeating a quiet sentence in his mind. Speak clearly. Speak honestly. The interview room was small and bright. 2 people sat across from him, Karen Mitchell, the hiring manager, and Tom Reynolds, a senior team lead. They smiled warmly, which eased his nerves just a little. When they asked him to introduce himself, Daniel felt his throat tighten, but he spoke anyway. His words were not flawless. He paused, he searched for phrases, but he didn't stop. He explained his experience, his interest in communication, and how he had been actively improving his English every day. Instead of hiding his weakness, he acknowledged it, and strangely, that honesty made him feel stronger. When Karen asked how he handled difficult conversations, Daniel shared a real story from the warehouse, how he once helped resolve a shipment issue by listening patiently instead of reacting defensively. As he spoke, he noticed something unexpected. They weren't judging his grammar. They were listening to his thinking. After the interview, Daniel stepped outside into the afternoon sunlight, feeling drained but proud. No matter the outcome, he had shown up as his real self. For the first time, English had not blocked his path. It had carried him forward. That evening, Daniel met Richard at the diner again. He told him everything: the nerves, the mistakes, the moments he almost froze. Richard smiled and said, "You didn't waste today. That's what matters." The next few days felt longer than usual. Every email notification made Daniel's heart jump. Doubt tried to creep back in, but it didn't stay as long as it used to. He kept practicing, kept speaking, kept moving. Then, one quiet morning, his phone buzzed. Job offer. Daniel read the message 3 times to be sure. He sat down on his bed, holding his phone like it was something fragile. The position wasn't glamorous, the salary wasn't life-changing, but to Daniel, it meant something far greater. It meant progress. It meant courage. It meant life was finally responding to his effort. And for the first time in years, Daniel didn't feel like he was wasting his life anymore. Daniel's first week in the new role felt like stepping into a completely different world. Instead of moving boxes, he now spoke to people. Customers called with questions, concerns, and sometimes frustration. Each call was a challenge, but also an opportunity. Daniel listened carefully, choosing his words slowly, making sure his tone stayed calm and respectful. At the beginning, his confidence wavered. Some customers spoke fast. Some used slang he didn't recognize. After a few calls, his palms would sweat and his voice would tighten, but he didn't shut down. He asked questions. He clarified. And when he didn't understand, he admitted it honestly. Most people appreciated that more than perfect English. One afternoon, after a particularly difficult call, Daniel sat back in his chair and exhaled deeply. A year ago, this moment would have terrified him. Now it energized him. Each mistake taught him something new. Each conversation made him sharper. During breaks, Daniel started helping coworkers rewrite emails or explain processes more clearly. He didn't realize it at first, but he was doing exactly what he once dreamed of: helping people through communication. English was no longer the obstacle, it was the tool. Outside of work, Daniel's life changed too. He spoke more confidently in public. He joined a local conversation group where people from different backgrounds shared stories and practiced language together. Hearing others struggle, improve, and succeed reminded him that growth was never a straight line. One evening, after a long day, Daniel sat alone in his apartment, reflecting on how far he had come. He thought about all the years he had delayed starting, all the excuses he had made. But instead of regret, he felt gratitude. Gratitude that he had finally chosen to begin. He picked up a notebook and wrote a sentence that felt powerful and true. You don't waste life by starting late. You waste it by never starting at all. That sentence became his quiet reminder for English, for life, for every dream he once postponed. As months passed, Daniel began to notice changes that went beyond language. His posture straightened, his voice carried more certainty. Even when he made mistakes, he no longer apologized for existing. He corrected himself and moved on. That confidence didn't come from perfect English, it came from consistent effort. One evening at work, Karen called Daniel into her office. For a brief moment, old fear resurfaced, but this time he walked in calmly. Karen smiled and thanked him for his dedication. She mentioned that several customers had specifically complimented his patience and clarity. Hearing that felt surreal. Daniel had once avoided conversations. Now people remembered him for how he spoke. Later that week, Daniel met Emily again in the break room. They talked about growth, careers, and how fear often disguises itself as comfort. Emily laughed and said, "You know, you're one of the most thoughtful communicators here." Daniel smiled, realizing that the thing he once believed was his weakness had slowly become his strength. At home, Daniel started recording short audio journals in English. He spoke about his thoughts, his doubts, his progress. Listening to older recordings shocked him. The difference was undeniable, not just in fluency, but in belief. One night, while organizing old files on his computer, Daniel found an unfinished document titled Goals. It was years old. Most of the goals felt distant, almost written by a stranger. But one line still mattered: help people through communication. Daniel didn't delete it, he updated it, because now he was living it. Success, Daniel learned, was quiet. It didn't announce itself loudly or arrive all at once. It showed up in small moments, in the way he answered the phone without hesitation, in how he explained complex issues simply, and in the calm confidence that replaced his old anxiety. One afternoon, a new trainee joined Daniel's team. His name was Lucas, and he reminded Daniel of his younger self. Quiet, careful, afraid of saying the wrong thing. During their first interaction, Lucas struggled to explain a simple issue and apologized repeatedly. Daniel stopped him gently and said, "It's okay. Take your time. I'm listening." Those words felt familiar. Daniel realized he was becoming the person he once needed. After work, Daniel walked through the city streets, noticing how different everything felt. The same buildings, the same traffic, the same routine, yet nothing felt heavy anymore. When you stop wasting life, even ordinary days feel meaningful. That evening, Daniel received a message from Richard. The older man invited him for coffee, his tone more serious than usual. When they met, Richard spoke slowly, carefully choosing his words. He explained that his health was declining and that he would be moving closer to family. Before leaving, Richard looked at Daniel and said, "Watching you grow reminded me that it's never too late to matter." They hugged briefly, and Daniel felt a deep sense of gratitude. Some people enter your life not to stay forever, but to redirect your path. That night, Daniel sat by his window, city lights glowing softly below. He thought about time, how quickly it moved, how easily it could be wasted, and how powerful it became when used with intention. English had not just given him words, it had given him a voice. And with that voice, he was finally living. With Richard gone, Daniel felt a quiet responsibility settle inside him. Not a heavy one, but a meaningful one. He realized that growth was not meant to stop with him. What he had learned was meant to be passed on. At work, Daniel volunteered to help with internal training sessions. The idea would have terrified him before. Standing in front of people, explaining procedures, answering questions, all in English. But now, fear felt familiar, manageable. He prepared carefully, practiced aloud, and focused on clarity rather than perfection. The first session was small, 5 people, simple slides. When Daniel spoke, his voice was steady. He explained concepts using real examples, pausing when needed, making sure everyone understood. When the session ended, one colleague said, "You make things easy to understand." That sentence stayed with him. Outside of work, Daniel started reflecting more deeply on his journey. He realized that learning English had never been just about grammar or vocabulary. It had been about identity, about stepping out of silence and choosing presence. One evening, while walking home, Daniel overheard a conversation between 2 teenagers struggling to express themselves in English. They laughed nervously, embarrassed by their mistakes. Daniel smiled to himself. He knew that stage well, and he knew what came after, if they didn't give up. At home, Daniel opened his old notebook again and added another line beneath his favorite sentence. "Your voice matters, even before it's perfect." He understood now that wasting life often looked like waiting, waiting to be ready, waiting to be confident, waiting to be flawless. Life didn't ask for readiness, it asked for participation. Daniel was no longer waiting. Months turned into a year, and Daniel's life had transformed in ways he never anticipated. His English fluency had improved dramatically, yes, but more importantly, his confidence, his presence, and his willingness to take risks had blossomed. He no longer saw mistakes as failures, but as stepping stones. One Saturday morning, Daniel decided to visit the diner where it all began. The familiar smell of coffee and warm pastries welcomed him like an old friend. He sat at the same table where he had met Richard and reflected quietly. So much had changed, yet some things remained the same. The city bustled outside, people moved in their routines, and life kept rolling forward. But Daniel noticed himself no longer standing still. He started writing, short articles, reflections on life, and even emails to strangers sharing his journey. He wanted others to understand that English, like life, was not about perfection, but about showing up consistently. Some messages he received were from people who felt stuck, unsure if it was too late to start. Daniel responded thoughtfully, sharing his story, hoping they could take their first step just as he did. At work, he was no longer just an employee, he had become a mentor. He trained new recruits with patience, teaching them not only procedures, but also the subtle art of confidence, communication, and perseverance. His own mistakes became teaching points, his struggles became inspiration. One evening, while reflecting on the past year, Daniel realized the most profound lesson. Life isn't measured by the hours we sit in comfort waiting for readiness. It's measured by the courage we show in moments that matter, by our willingness to start, to stumble, and to grow. That night, he prepared a simple list. Things he wanted to do, experiences he wanted to have, people he wanted to connect with. Nothing extraordinary, yet everything meaningful. And as he wrote, he smiled. For the first time, he didn't feel like life was slipping away. He felt like he was finally living. Daniel began to notice subtle changes in the way people responded to him. His coworkers no longer looked at him as just another employee doing routine tasks. Clients responded warmly to his voice, and colleagues sought his advice when they struggled with communication. The small victories, a clear sentence, a confident explanation, a gentle correction became milestones that marked his journey. One evening, Emily approached him with a project idea. She wanted to create short English learning sessions for their team, blending life lessons with language practice. Daniel felt a spark of excitement. He realized that his struggles, once isolating, could now become tools to help others. Together, they brainstormed, writing down topics, exercises, and ways to make learning interactive and enjoyable. As weeks went by, Daniel found himself more reflective. He began journaling not just in English, but about life itself. Each entry included a lesson, a reflection on fear, a reminder of perseverance. He noticed patterns, how avoiding discomfort had cost him opportunities in the past, and how embracing challenges created new ones. He also started to recognize his limits, understanding that growth wasn't about being perfect, but about being persistent. Outside work, Daniel took small steps toward a richer life. He joined community events, met new people, and occasionally gave short talks about his journey. At first, it terrified him to stand before strangers, but he remembered the countless small moments of courage he had practiced in English conversations, interviews, and team meetings. Slowly, those fears melted away. What once felt impossible now felt natural. And every night, as he sat by his window looking at the city lights, Daniel reflected on a simple truth. Life is too short to wait for the perfect moment. Opportunities aren't gifts to be received passively, they are doors to be opened with deliberate action. The language he once feared became his bridge, and the courage he once lacked became his path. Daniel's confidence now extended beyond work and language. He began to notice opportunities in everyday life that he would have ignored before. Invitations to networking events, community workshops, even casual conversations with strangers became chances to grow, to connect, to learn. He realized that the life he once thought was ordinary was filled with potential he had simply overlooked. One rainy afternoon, Daniel decided to revisit some of his old habits, the ones that had once wasted so much of his time. Instead of scrolling endlessly on his phone, he chose to read, to reflect, and plan small, achievable steps toward new goals. Each small victory, completing a chapter in a book, writing a reflection, helping someone communicate better, accumulated into a quiet but powerful momentum. Emily noticed the change too. One evening she said, "Daniel, you've transformed. It's not just your English, it's the way you approach everything now." Daniel smiled, realizing that growth wasn't only internal, it radiated outward. Confidence, persistence, and clarity were contagious. Others began to mirror his determination, asking questions, seeking guidance, and learning alongside him. At the same time, Daniel's perspective on mistakes changed entirely. Where he once felt embarrassed or defeated, he now saw lessons. Misspeaking became practice. Misunderstanding became insight. Even failure became feedback. He began to live by a simple mantra. Every step, even the wrong one, moves you forward. One quiet evening, Daniel wrote a letter to his younger self, the man who had once postponed life for fear and comfort. In it, he wrote, "You were scared, but you survived. You hesitated, but you tried. And that is enough. Start now, always." Folding the paper carefully, he placed it in a drawer, a private reminder of how far he had come. Life was no longer a series of delays and excuses. It was deliberate, intentional, and meaningful. And Daniel finally understood that the lessons he had learned in English were lessons for life itself. Speak boldly, act intentionally, and never waste the moments you have. As Daniel's journey progressed, he began to embrace challenges that once would have paralyzed him. He started volunteering to lead small workshops at the community center, teaching practical English skills paired with life lessons. Each session was a mix of mistakes, laughter, learning, and growth. He discovered that teaching others reinforced his own confidence and fluency, while also giving him a deep sense of purpose. One day, while preparing a lesson, Daniel reflected on how much his life had changed in just over a year. The man who once avoided conversations, feared mistakes, and wasted time had become someone who sought opportunities, faced challenges, and valued every moment. He realized that English had been a gateway, but the real journey had been about courage, persistence, and action.
Emily suggested recording short videos for online learners, sharing lessons from their workshops. Daniel hesitated, as public speaking on camera terrified him more than live audiences. But he remembered all the small steps he had taken, speaking to coworkers, practicing at home, interviewing confidently, and decided to try. The first video was shaky, his words imperfect, but the content was sincere. The response was immediate. Comments from people inspired to start their own journey, messages thanking him for honesty, and questions about continuing learning. Through this, Daniel understood a powerful truth. Mistakes don't disqualify you from helping others, they enhance your credibility. Every struggle he had faced made his story relatable, and every moment of persistence became guidance for someone else. At home that evening, Daniel wrote in his notebook, "Life is not measured by perfection, but by the courage to start, continue, and inspire." He smiled, realizing he had become living proof of that principle. The fear of wasted time had transformed into motivation to make every day meaningful. Daniel's confidence now extended into every aspect of his life. He began reaching out to old friends and colleagues he had lost touch with over the years, apologizing for silence, reconnecting, and sharing his journey. To his surprise, many were inspired by his honesty and growth. Some even asked him for advice, hoping to overcome their own fears of starting late or facing challenges. At work, Daniel was now seen as a leader, someone approachable and dependable. He continued mentoring new team members, helping them navigate both language and life skills. Each success story, each improvement reminded him how far he had come. He also started attending local meetups focused on communication and personal development. The first time he stood in a room full of strangers to speak, his heart raced like it used to during interviews. But now, the nerves were accompanied by excitement, not fear. Daniel's evenings became a blend of reflection, learning, and planning. He continued recording his thoughts, sharing lessons, and writing down ideas for future workshops. He understood that growth was ongoing, that life would never stop presenting challenges, and that each challenge was an opportunity to apply everything he had learned. One quiet Sunday, Daniel took a long walk through the park. He observed people, conversations, families, and children learning and laughing. He thought about how many people let fear or procrastination waste their potential, and he silently promised himself that he would continue to inspire others to act before it was too late. English had become more than words. It had become a path to freedom, confidence, and impact. That night, Daniel wrote a final note for the week in his journal. The life you want begins the moment you choose courage over comfort. Speak, act, learn, live. And with that, he felt a deep, satisfying calm, the calm of someone finally living intentionally. Months had passed, and Daniel could hardly recognize the man he used to be.
The fear, hesitation, and self-doubt that had once defined him had been replaced by courage, curiosity, and determination. Learning English had been the spark, but living intentionally had become the flame. Each day, each conversation, each small action reinforced a simple truth. Life only rewards those who engage fully, even if imperfectly. Daniel now took time each morning to reflect, set intentions, and practice English in real-world situations. He wrote emails, spoke on calls, led workshops, and even created short video lessons that reached learners across the country. His story, once private, now had the power to inspire others, and he felt a deep sense of responsibility to continue sharing it. On one particular evening, Daniel returned to the diner where it all began, now a ritual of reflection. He ordered a coffee and sat by the window, watching the city bustle by. Memories of the older man, Richard, came flooding back. His words, his guidance, his belief in Daniel's potential. Daniel smiled and whispered to himself, "I am using my time. I am living my life." Later that night, he sat at his desk writing a letter not for anyone else, but for himself. He wrote about his journey, the mistakes, the small victories, the lessons learned. And in bold letters at the top, he wrote, "Don't waste your life. Start now. Speak, act, grow, inspire." Daniel knew life would continue to challenge him. New fears would emerge, new obstacles would appear. But he also knew one undeniable fact. He would no longer be frozen by them. The man who once waited, hesitated, and wasted days had become someone who acted, learned, and thrived. English had been his tool, but courage had been his guide. And as the city lights twinkled outside his window, Daniel finally felt at peace. Life was no longer something that happened to him. It was something he actively created, moment by moment, choice by choice. Thank you for joining us today on Whisped Tales. Daniel's journey reminds us that life is too precious to waste, and that even small steps taken consistently can lead to incredible change. If you enjoyed this story, please like this video and subscribe to our channel for more inspiring tales. Next time, we'll bring you another story filled with lessons, courage, and motivation, one that you'll feel and remember long after it ends. Until then, remember, don't wait, don't hesitate, and never waste your life.